Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss Rishi Sunak's car crash appearance on GB News last night, which I'm afraid I'm going to have to say provides evidence for what I have been saying. Rishi Sunak is chasing after the wrong voters, and he's going to be dreadful in the general election. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So Rishi Sunak had last night a carefully hand-picked audience with pre-scripted questions, and he still made an arse of it. And we know that this is what he had because our Graham Hughes managed to wheedle himself onto the audience list with messages confirming where he should meet for the shuttle bus to the secret location was all set up. Then on the day itself had the invitation rescinded. Obviously someone looked him up online. It's quite easy. Now, given that this very obvious check did not take place before all the invitations were sent out and all the details of where you should meet, we reckon it might have been a final Downing Street check. That would suggest there's a chance that Rishi Sunak had a personal veto on audience members. And we know they weren't being too careful with their audience checks because a convicted thug was not only allowed to attend, but actually caused Sunak major grief. So it's the most embarrassing moment, surely. They'd have been better off blocking him than Graham. But because he's a Brexiteer, didn't matter what was that he was also convicted of violently assaulting two women, including grabbing one by the head and throwing her downstairs. Somehow he managed to avoid prison, but also somehow he managed to make it through the GB News and Downing Street vetting process to be allowed to drop Sunak right in it. In fact, I'd recommend watching the clip. It's in the description below. It was quite remarkable, particularly when you think this was a hand-picked audience. The guy was unable to stand still for a swat. He was swinging around like Michael Gove after a good night out. He went on full COVID vaccine conspiracy theory. He was allowed to build up to a crescendo of rhetoric. Should have been nipped in the bud. He was allowed to talk for a very long time and he was clearly getting very, very agitated. He got a round of applause from the audience after his in excess of 1 minute rant. Sunak had absolutely no idea how to deal with it at all. Hadn't prepared for it at all. Trapped between knowing that the guy was off his head, knowing he couldn't just appease him because, you know, going down the Andrew Bridgen path, yeah, that's lose you lots of votes. There's a reason why they removed the whip from Andrew Bridgen, but also knowing that he wanted people like this to vote for him. Completely trapped, didn't know what to do. And although I will say this particular question shouldn't have been that awkward, because remember, Sunak's aim on the show is to try and win back the Reform UK voters that the Tories have lost. Now, Reform UK, for all their many, many faults, are not vaccine conspiracists. So Sunak does not even need to hint at sympathy for this sort of conspiracy theory because Reform UK aren't either. But because Sunak had in his mind that he was there to appeal and appease, he just didn't know how to deal with a confrontation like this. He wasn't able to say, look, I mean, he started to say, look, I'm sorry about, you know, your own personal situation, but you're basically blaming the wrong thing. He was incapable of saying that. You're blaming the wrong thing. You've fallen down a rabbit hole, mate. Sit down, you're making a fool of yourself. So the convicted thug carried on, kept interrupting Sunak while he was feebly trying to bat it away. Someone joined in on the other side of the studio. So he's like, oh no, completely floundering, hideous mess. In the end, he had to be rescued by the GB News host, who very politely told them both to shut up. And at the end of that was, remember, this was a hand-picked audience designed to amplify Sunak's appeal to Reform UK voters. It wasn't a public debate. It wasn't there for Sunak to just field questions from the public. It was there to help him appeal to Reform UK voters that had been lost by the Conservatives. You know, the people leaving the studio were asked what they thought of it. And there's one particular clip, and it's absolutely spectacular. The responses were from this hand-picked audience where they weren't impressed. They didn't have their opinion swayed. They didn't think the Conservatives would win the election. One even asked where they handed their expenses claim in. So they were being paid to attend as well. Even when the Tories set up a fake public debate, Sunak makes an arse of it. But in reality, it was the wrong fake public debate to set up. The Tories only have one line to use on the people they've lost to Reform UK. A vote for Reform UK is a vote for Labour. That's it. You're splitting the Tory vote and helping Labour. That's all they can do. You know, that is the line. Absolutely, you know, their strategy should be urging Sunak to plug, but they should say, forget about any arguments on policy. You can't win them. You know, the line about splitting the vote, that will work because the voters the Tories are losing to Reform UK hates Labour. But nothing else will work because Sunak cannot and should not try to appeal to those voters by adopting Reform UK policies because it can't work. They're in government and it's not just that they'll put off moderate voters who are in greater numbers. It's that they're in government right now. Their achievements do not match that rhetoric. So they can't adopt the rhetoric. It's not credible. Reform UK will just say, oh, it's all right them saying that. Why haven't they done it then? The only saving grace for Sunak is that no bugger watched it, really, relatively speaking. I gather only 153,000 watched it. I could get better figures for that if I had Rishi Sunak on one of my streams. Don't think he'll accept the invitation, mind you. But what it highlighted was that Sunak is chasing after the wrong voters. It's not just about that thug. If the audience in general were not convinced, when he was talking to them directly, like, you know, in politics, you know, your political leaders, this is why we talk about, you know, why having that sort of charisma that comes across a camera is really powerful. You're trying to persuade millions of people to vote for you whom you'll never meet. You'll never get to talk to them directly. You'll never get to listen to their specific issue and for you to explain how you are going to help it. Here was people, he was doing that. He was fielding their questions. He was answering their questions. The questions they chose were the things that were most important to them. He was able to talk directly to them and he still couldn't win them over. How is he supposed to win over Reform UK voters with whom he's not talking directly? He should be focusing on the don't know voters, I keep saying. But it also shows how he's incapable of people management. Come the general election campaign, he is going to face people that are angry with real grievances this time, not just made up ones. And if he meets people on the streets, he can't vet those in advance. How's he going to cope? The audience for TV debates on real media channels, they're not going to be handpicked by Downing Street, no matter how badly. How's he going to cope with genuinely representative audiences? Lots of people were like appalled that the event was even going to go ahead because it's basically a party political broadcast without having to be classed as such. You know, it was all set up by the Tories and GB News. It was an affront to democratic norms. But there were people in advance who thought, well, don't worry, because Sunak's going to make an arse of it, isn't he? And it'll end up causing net damage to the Tories. They were probably right, weren't they? Presumably, Sunak has been meeting with his advisors this morning to debrief. I'd love to have been there. I wonder if they tried to big him up by focusing on the positives. Not sure what they would be, mind you. I wonder if they even tried to talk about what a clown car crash it was. Because if Sunak and his advisors did not discuss the carnage frankly, if they didn't go into that meeting going, right, that was a shit show, let's go through what went wrong, and set out how to learn from it, then what's going to happen? Sunak will carry on being bog useless. So the silver lining here seems to be that even when the Tories break down democratic norms and use the media to their advantage blatantly, they still manage to turn it into a disadvantage. A combination of the inability of Sunak to talk to people who didn't attend £40,000 a year schools and the low budget incompetence of GB News, who must have known they were attracting crazies and yet had no safeguards in place to deal with the inevitable fallout. And the other thing as well, just to consider, like, despite, I don't know how the debrief with his advisor would have gone this morning. I don't know whether they'll have tried to butcher him up and say, oh yeah, it might have been a bit grueling for you, but actually, this came well, we've got this, then this was good, and that was good, and this was good. But even if that's the case, surely Rishi Sunak will not have enjoyed that. And actually, the more encounters he has like that are really unpleasant for him, the more he'll withdraw. You know, the more he will want to avoid similar ones, because he's a very wealthy man. He's a very privileged man. He's not used to this. He won't like it. And he will withdraw. And there is a chance that he may withdraw during the general election campaign and be a bit like Theresa May. A bit like Theresa May, who reduces the number of times they go out amongst the public. And that will only work to the harm of the Conservatives. Or maybe it won't. Maybe it's actually better for the Conservatives that Sunak hides away. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.